responsibility that's really given to the church at the end of the day. Okay? And sometimes, I think even in modern society, we've abandoned a lot of the responsibility as parents in terms of the training of our children to the church. That's not to say that the church doesn't participate, or even that the civil government doesn't participate. But to delegate that authority means, in the delegation of authority, means that there's a certain oversight that we still retain, and we're the ones that God is going to hold accountable. Okay. Bert?
Yeah, on Friday night I did a presentation that this was part of, and I pointed out to the group, I only listed 4 examples, but there's actually 7 or 8, most of which emanated from schools, where the U.S. Supreme Court says the parents are primarily responsible for the raising of and education of their children. And as we progress through the 20th century, they start saying things like, it is beyond debate that parents are. And they even expressly say on several occasions, the child is not the mere creature of the state. And the last time they said that was in the year 2000. Yeah. So even the 9 wise souls, over time, understand that.
With one exception, compulsory education laws.
Well, the first case that I was referring to was Oregon's compulsory education law.
Right.
And they said, you can't make the kids go to public schools.
Right. So we've turned that on its head today. Right?
No, that's still true.
Well, but you have to make them go to school, and if you don't educate them, the state sees that as a justification to take them away.
Well, true, but
right?
They just make it difficult for you to actually do that because they make you pay to educate other people's kids.
Right.
Without helping you, but
now
they still recognize it in principle.
Right. And you know, there is an overlap here, right? And that is that I would never argue that a parent has the right to take the life of their child. Okay, and of course that's one of those things that's been in the news here in Oregon over the last several years, have been religious orders that believe that, you know, they shouldn't get their child medical attention. And so here you have this area where there's going to be a clash, if you will, between the authority and responsibility of the parent and the authority and responsibility of the state. And even if you go back into Scripture, we do get some hint about this, right? Because if a family had a son that was disobedient and reprobate, the family was not permitted to take the life of that son. They were to bring that before the priest and before the civil government, and it was their responsibility. So there's a limitation on that whole issue of life that surrounds it, which then also, of course, says the same thing about abortion. Stephen?
I would also insert that would also apply to Muslim practice honor killings, but
yep.
Would line out.
Yeah. Okay. Now, by extension, we also want to talk about the actual education of children. All right. And where does the education of children fall? Same place, right? Now, one of the things that's, and I put this on purpose here, because there are other forms of education, as we'll see, that were given responsibilities elsewhere. Okay? So, and it's one of those things that we don't think a lot about today. We kind of lump everything into education of children. All right? And so when we talk about education today, it's kind of like when we talk about government today. Up here, I intentionally put the word civil government. Right? We've lost the idea that there are different spheres of government. You know, I could have put family government here, church government here, right? And our founders, one of the things our founders understood very well is that there's also individual government. And so in their day, in the 1700s, if you would have said the word government, they wouldn't have known what the heck you were talking about. Whereas today, if I say the word government, what do you think of?
Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C., right? You don't even think of county government, you don't think of state government. When I say government, immediately your mind goes to, you know, the feds, right? Okay, and again, I'm not going to spend time going through all those verses. That's kind of left as an exercise to the student here. The next thing I had on the list was the whole issue of family welfare. And of course, I guess by calling it that, I give it away, right?
Are you referring to though when a family cannot take care of themselves?
No, I'm referring to the idea that in Scripture, the family is more than the husband, the wife, and the juvenile children. Okay, so in Scripture, the first line of defense in poverty was the extended family. And there's all sorts of biblical examples of that, right? One was the Levirate laws associated with what would happen if a man died and his wife was left alone. And we talked a little bit about that the last time, that one of the things that we have in our society that I think is that makes it very difficult is the pandemic we have right now of single moms. I think probably everybody in here could probably list off 10 single moms that they know. And that is a radical change from when I was a child. Radical change. And one of the things that is a problem in our culture then as a result is that these single moms are also kind of expected to live on their own, to raise their children on their own, whereas the biblical model would have been that she moves in with a brother-in-law or father-in-law. And so she would be in a household that was headed by a man and had that influence on her children as well. And it's one of those things that we don't think about very much in the church, because we almost in the church buy into that model. Whereas if there ends up being a single mom in the church, we think, one of the things we ought to do is find a way to financially support her in her own home, kind of living on her own. And I guess I would challenge us to rethink that a little bit. Are we really helping a single mom? And of course, the whole pathology that leads to single motherhood is a whole other issue. But it has to do with, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we promote this lie that if you're a single mom, you in fact can live a normal life and be supported. And who becomes the father in that case? The government. Right. And we see this more and more. We see this not only in the sense of single moms, but we see this in the sense of the elderly. And so what we see with things like Social Security and other things like that is we basically see the government coming in and atomizing the family. So because of things like Social Security, we separate one generation from another. Because of the things like aid for dependent children, we separate husband and wife. One of the things that they're observing in places like England today is that the connection between adult children and their parents is almost non-existent. That the children don't contact their parents, they have no they just have no interaction with their parents whatsoever, because that's the government's job. And so, you see that one of the things that Satan attacks, right, is the family in a major way. And all of these things which sound good on the surface probably have the support of many Christians, who wants to see anybody living in poverty. But many of these things that have been put in place have actually ended up being to the destruction of society. Okay, Kurt?
Yeah, I was going to say, in part because of having Grace in our family, we've developed connections with a lot of people from Asian cultures. You do not see the sort of generational separation in Asian cultures. And I can think of several families, for example, where they collaborate on buying property together, and if there's an elderly relative, particularly a widow, the kids don't even have to be asked. They just pool their resources to take care of mom, and it's not even a question to them. And that's a paradigm that we've completely lost track of, and for which I commend people who grew up with that kind of value, that you take care of your elders and the people that can't. And similarly, if there are people in the family who are having a tough time, they look to their extended family first. They don't look to the government. They may eventually tap into government resources, but that's not the first thing they look to.
Yeah. Let me go back to this one also in line with what Herb was saying about the children. And that is that one of the things, however, that is unique to Western culture, and if you talk with people around the world, you'll discover this, and that is the whole idea of adoption.